Hey kids, Flexing Teacher Weber here. Hope you're having a good day. We have started a unit on integers. The last time we did some work, we did some basic introductory work with integers. Now we've started looking at adding integers. And the idea with adding integers is we really want to focus on using a model for adding and subtracting integers. And when combining integers, the most important part is to remember that the sign in front of the integer belongs to that integer. So if I have this statement here, plus 5 minus 7, that actually means positive 5, negative 7. And what I'll often do is I'll write a little circle around the integer and its sign. That means positive 5, negative 7. And this statement down here, minus 4, minus 8, I like to think of that as negative 4 and negative 8. Okay? So the sign in front of the integer belongs to that integer. The next thing I like to look at is something called the integer model. Now, many teachers and people use this model in many different ways. Now, what I like to do, it doesn't really matter how you use it, just as long as we're all on the same page. What I like to do is I like to use shaded in circles to represent a positive integer. So a shaded in circle will represent positive 1, and an unshaded circle will represent negative 1. So if I have something like this, I want to leave that. Oopsies, there we go. If I have something like doink, 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 that integer is positive 5. And then if I make all those go away, and if I have doink, 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 that integer represented there is negative 3. Now, the big thing that comes into play is when you have something like this and this, when you have a negative and a positive. So right there I have negative 1 and positive 1. And what happens with those two is that when you have a negative, they cancel out. A negative and a positive together cancel out, and they make what's called a zero pair. Okay? So if I have negative 1 and positive 1, they cancel out and they make 0. Okay? So if I had this situation here, if I had doink, oops, I need a bigger picture. If I had doink, 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 and doink, doink, these two positives would each cancel out with a negative, and I would be left with negative 1. So the main thing to remember about the integer model is that positives and negatives cancel each other out. And we call that a zero pair. So what I'm going to write here is that every time you have a positive and a negative together, we call these two together, I'm having some trouble right now. We call these two together a zero pair because they make 0. And that's the model we're going to use to help us add and subtract integers. So I've got some questions here with integers in groups. And I just want to clear something off here because I forgot to clear something off. So let me take this and do this. So we'll clear off that guy. There we go. So I've got some questions here with some integers, and I've got them grouped into groups of 3, and each group of 3 is sort of the same, and we're going to model them out and look for some patterns. So the first one I model is all when we have 2 positives. So if you take a look at this one, I'm going to switch there. This one, we have positive 4 combined with positive 2. Well, to model out positive 4, I would do 4 shaded circles. And to model out positive 2, I would do 2 shaded circles. Now, we have no zero pairs here. Nothing cancels out. So my answer is positive 6. Because nothing cancels out. Now, if I go to the next question, I want to model out positive 5 plus positive 3. Well, I'll do 5 positives. I'll do 3 positives. Nothing cancels out, so I'm left with positive 8. And when I get to number 3, positive 1 combined with positive 6. Well, 1 positive and 6 positives. And again, I have no zero pairs. Nothing cancels out. So I just count up what's left. And I have 7 positives. So that's what happens when I have 2 positives. I just combine them and I get a positive answer. Now let's look at another group of 3. Let's look at what happens when I have 2 negatives. So right here, if I was to model out -4, -2, I'll model this out right here. And again, I have no zero pairs. I have nothing that cancels out. All I have are 6 white circles, and so that equals -6. And then if I go and model this one out, -5 combined with -3. So I'll model that out. Here's 5 negatives. Here's 3 negatives. There's no zero pairs. Nothing cancels. So I just count up what's there. And what's there is 5 plus 3 are 8 white circles, or we would say -8. And then my last set in this group, -2 and -1. Well, if I was to model that out, there's 2 negatives and there's 1 negative. Nothing cancels out. There's nothing that's taken away. So I'm left with -3. Okay, so this set, when I had 2 negatives, I added them up and used the negative sign. Now the last in this group, sometimes integer questions, it's just hard to understand what they actually say. So this one, a lot of people look at it and go, well, that's -3 minus 2. And that's totally correct to think of it like that, but I like to think of it like this. I like to think of it that the sign in front of the integer belongs to that integer. So I like to think of it as 3 negatives and 2 negatives. And if I was to model that out now, I'd have 3 negatives and 2 negatives. And since there's no zero pairs, nothing cancels out, I'd be left with -5. And same thing with number 8. I have -4, I have -4. So if I was to model that out, I'd have 4 negatives, I'd have 4 negatives, nothing cancels out, there's nothing that makes a zero pair, so I'm left with 8 white circles or -8. And same thing right here, -6, -7. I always think of it as the sign in front of the integer goes with the integer. -6, -7. So I've got 6 white circles and 7 white circles. Nothing cancels out, so I'm left with 13 white circles or -13. So if you take a look here, in every one of these situations where the integers had the same sign, we added them up and we used whatever sign they shared. So 2 negatives added to give a negative, and 2 positives added to give a positive. So that's our rule. If the signs are the same when combining 2 integers, add them and use the common sign. So that's the first rule I want to look at for adding integers. If the signs are the same, when combining 2 integers, add them and use the common sign. So in the next video, we'll look at what happens when you have different signs. That's all for now. Flexing Teacher Weber, out.